Hi, my name is Friday, and in this video, I'm going to be explaining and creating a virtual machine. Now, before we begin, in high school, when I was a lot younger, one of my favorite things to do was play video games. I played an embarrassing amount of video games in terms of hours spent, an embarrassing amount of hours spent playing video games. And I mean, now playing video games is normal and regular, but it was, let's just say, my parents did not love how much time I spent playing video games. Nevertheless, my console of choice that brings me the most nostalgia is an Xbox 360, and specifically the video game Gears of War. I love Gears of War. I remember one time I was out and about and I saw a guy with a Gears of War tattoo on his arm, and it was an immediate conversation starter between him and I, and the mutual hours spent playing Gears of War, and all of that was played on a gaming console called an Xbox 360. Now, I had a lot of friends who also played video games too. However, some of my friends opted to use a gaming computer. They would go out of their way to buy a computer and they would build a computer. And I never really understood it. It seemed, number one, expensive. They'd spend thousands of dollars on this computer when an Xbox 360 was a few $100. And then it took time to put that computer together. So to put a gaming computer together, it seemed too complicated for me at the time when all I wanted to do was just hop online and play Gears of War 3. Now, on the subject of virtual machines, a virtual machine is a computer just like an Xbox 360, just like a gaming PC. However, the virtual machine is more like a gaming computer than an Xbox 360. I would equate an Xbox 360 closer to a MacBook. Just like a MacBook, an Xbox 360, I buy it from the store, it's configured, it's packaged, I just plug it in, turn it on, and I'm good to go. Same thing with my MacBook. Like I explained with a gaming PC, you have to buy different parts, put it together, and configure it in a way that actually works. And it's also, not only does it take a bit more time, it can be more expensive to actually have a configured machine with various parts to do to be have a bit more performance and capabilities that come with it. Here in Azure, and for any cloud platform, and this is the beauty and the innovation of the cloud, is that you can hop on Azure and create a virtual machine and configure it to do whatever you want. The configuration that is possible with Azure is, there's a lot that is possible that is not possible with a MacBook. A MacBook, I'm able to download different software, download different, applications that I can use, such as Word for word processing, PowerPoint to make PowerPoint decks, Photoshop to edit edit photos, Final Cut Pro to edit videos. There's so much you can do with a MacBook, but like an Xbox is to a gaming PC, there's just more you can do with a virtual machine. And I was curious about what more meant, and that's what's led me to learn about AWS, Azure, and here I'm going to be explaining and creating a virtual machine, which is a lot more powerful than a MacBook computer, and of course takes a lot more configuration. There's a bit more steps and understanding to create it. But just like an Xbox 360, just like a gaming PC, just like a MacBook, a virtual machine is just a computer that we configure to do specialized tasks. That's really it. It gets a bit more complicated as we move along. But to start, that's really how I understand a virtual machine. I don't play as much video games anymore, but at the reflecting on my time playing video games is really helpful. It was really helpful for understanding virtual machines. So right now I'm in the Azure portal. I got here in the top left, you can click all services and virtual machines. That's what pops up, and you can also type virtual machines as well. Top left, create an Azure virtual machine. And there's a lot of settings that we can go through, and we'll go through each of these settings one by one as briefly as possible. However, each explanation is going to be important because Azure is different from AWS, different from GCP, etc. Beginning with a subscription. So a subscription is just a sort of organization tool where you can manage different access controls, you can set roles and permissions for what can be created. And so you can also define and monitor costs and usage of resources within a subscription. So it's kind of like a folder, if you will. That's how I think about an Azure subscription. It's not so consequential in regards to how the VM operates. It's just for organization. So in this case, we can just pick Azure subscription 1. In terms of a resource group is, think of it like a subfolder. So you can further manage resources in you can further manage resources in a resource group. You can have multiple resource groups in an Azure subscription. So kind of a hierarchy, if you will, where at the top is Azure subscription, and then below that is a resource group. So in our case, what we'll do is create new, and I'll call it create VM. So created a virtual machine here, click OK, or it's the resource group for a virtual machine. And so all that means is this virtual machine is going to be inside of this resource group folder, quote unquote folder, which will be in the Azure subscription as well. Like that's kind of how the organization is working here. In terms of virtual machine name, call it create VM. Region, I'm going to use East US. In terms of what a region is just a geographic area where Microsoft has data centers. And so what we're doing here effectively is we are using Microsoft servers we're configuring them based on what our needs are and what we want to do. So typically you want to choose a region that's closest to where the users of that virtual machine are. I am based on the East Coast, so I'm going to use East US, but there are multiple regions throughout the world that you can choose from. All right, availability options. So what is an availability option? What is an availability zone? So availability zone is just locations within a region. So there's a region, which is a geographic area somewhere, at least for East US, somewhere on the East Coast. And an availability zone is just a location in that region. So kind of like how beneath subscription was a resource group, I also think about availability zones, beneath availability zones. I like to think about them starting with regions at the top, and then beneath that, in terms of the hierarchy, are availability zones. What's special about availability zones is you can have, in terms of redundancy and availability. So a very important concept is that You know, you don't just want, especially for critical services, think about a business, a large corporation, they have services and different applications that they need to use. And we don't want any situations of an outage causing a disruption in our business operations. And so what we can do here is we can have decided a location, aka an availability zone, deciding a location within the region of East US that we are going to have our server, that where we're going to create our server. So here we have self-selected zone, which means we can choose up to 3 availability zones. And then here we can pick zone 1, and we can also pick zone 2, and also pick zone 3. So this effectively means that there will be 3 virtual machines, 1 in each selected zone. So like I mentioned, the reason that you'd want to do that is because in the case of an outage, a server issue, for whatever reason, if your server goes down, you can set it up where whatever's going on or whatever you have configured on the server in zone 1, you can create a failover, or you can set it up where whatever was happening in zone 1 will be replicated in zone 2. Think about a website where if it's replicated in 2 locations across 2 servers, aka 2 zones, if one website server goes down, the other one is still available for visitors to be able to use. Security types. Let's take a look at what options are here. When we think about security, very important for many obvious reasons that are mainstream now, and in regards to hacks and security failures. We have so many different examples that we can point to. So without, it's pretty obvious why security is important here. But we have a few options, really depending on our use case and what we, our risk, kind of our the level of risk that we want to consider. So first we have standard. Standard includes, basic security features. Think encryption at rest for the data on your virtual machine. We also have network security groups so you can configure how your virtual machine can be accessed via a network. And then also, when we move on to things like a trusted launch virtual machines, those have additional security features such as booting the VM from a trusted, like secure boot. So let me see here. Like configurable features like secure boot. So what that means is when your virtual machine is being launched, making sure that the software that the virtual machine is using for launching, it's possible that can be compromised. And so this is, the trusted launch of virtual machines allows for an important security feature where the perhaps may be verified by a hash, which is a certain cryptographic way to validate that a software is the software we want to boot our system with, as opposed to malicious code that can be embedded into the root volume of a virtual machine, where the consequence of starting that virtual machine can lead to a cybersecurity incident. So trusted launch virtual machines can be very important for additional security, such as secure boot. Next, confidential virtual machines is the third one here, which is just additional security features that are not available in the previous 2 security types. This includes things like data encrypted in memory. So memory is, there are different types of storage. Memory being a certain type of storage where it's just used, kind of short-term storage used for an application. Maybe as you have the application open and you're being used, the application needs a certain amount of memory to run properly. So having that encrypted is just additional layer of security. Furthermore, a VTPM, what I'm reading here, is something that is available in confidential virtual machines and also trusted launch virtual machines. And all that means is it's a device that a virtual device that you can use to store encryption keys, certificates, and other secrets that are important for other secrets that are very sensitive but are important for running different applications and services on your virtual machine. So lots of different security types here. As you can see, it can get very, very complex depending on your use case. So here we're just going to use standard and keep it moving. An image is it's just a pre-configured template for a virtual machine. So what's very common and even in a lot of the labs that I do, I use an Ubuntu server, which is a type of Linux, a certain distribution of Linux. Linux is it's a common operating system. Being able to interact with Linux is really important when administering virtual machines. So in this case, we're going to use Ubuntu server. Here we're going to use there's two different options here that we can pick from, ARM64 and x64. And that's here in the VM architecture. And what this is denoting is certain physical configurations of your virtual machine. So that the virtual machine that we're configuring right now exists in a data center and somewhere in the eastern United States in a specific location marked as Zone 1. Now that physical machine, that's an actual physical machine that we're using. And these are just ways to describe like the different physical components that make up a virtual machine. So when we think about ARM64 is typically used for, mobile phones, like mobile phone services for and applications for mobile phones. I think IoT devices, edge computing, things of that nature. It's less powerful than x64, which is often used in enterprise environments for workloads that require more compute. So picking between either or, ARM64 is going to be cheaper just because it is not as powerful as the x64. And so the VM architecture here is just, in these two options describe the physical configurations that are available for us to use here in Azure when creating our virtual machine. So we're going to use ARM64, free services eligible. There's more images, but we'll keep it simple for this example here. Run with Azure Spot Discount. That just means if you use compute that is already allocated for other users in Azure, but it's not being used. And so in this case, you can get a discount if you select, but for instance here, your virtual machine will be evicted when Azure's excess capacity disappears. So the excess capacity that Azure is trying to essentially resell to you, the issue here is if once that goes away, say whoever's capacity that is designated to, if they need that capacity, you're going to get kicked out. And so definitely a violation of availability in that sense when thinking about security and delivering services from our server to our users. So we're going to skip using this spot discount. We also have your virtual machine will be evicted. Yep. Yeah, cost to see. Just different configurations for for what will happen when the excess capacity disappears. So that's the Azure Spot discount and how that works here. So in terms of size is alt size is just about the performance of our virtual machine. There are different measures of performance that we won't get into right now, but we can see all sizes here if we wanted to Pick one based on, like, for instance, the amount of CPU that it has, the RAM that it has, the disks the sort of disk capacity that it has, the IOPS, which is the read and write performance. So lots of different available virtual machines that are available for us to choose from. But again, we're going to keep it simple and just pick here the standard 2 CPUs, which works for us here. We're going to skip enabling hibernation. It's not even available for our option here. And now let's talk about the administrator account. So here, there are 2 ways we can access our virtual machine. One is with the username and password. If you know anything about usernames and passwords, is that yours has probably been stolen at some point in your life. And so typically they're not the most secure option between these 2 options. We have an SSH public key. All that means for using SSH public key, it stands for secure shell, and it's just a way where we can create a file that we would actually download. It's a key pair, and when we download we have a private key that we would use to get into our virtual machine through SSH. And so what happens is you can typically through a terminal, and this is why understanding how to work with different machines. In this case, we're working with a Linux machine, and with Ubuntu Linux, we can, even right here on my Mac, I can open up a terminal and I can access my virtual machine from my MacBook, which is what I want. I want to be able to access my virtual machine, but instead of username and password, we're going to use our MacBook terminal. There's also a Cloud Shell. Is within Azure, you can open up a terminal as well, very conveniently, and you can actually SSH into your virtual machine right here in Azure as well. You don't have to use your terminal. So that's all that means. It's just a secure way to access your virtual machine. Instead of a username and password, you're going to use a key pair. And so here we can put still need to put a create VM. Need to put a username here. We're going to use RSA SSH format to generate a new key pair. We can also use existing keys if we wanted to. Going to name create VM. Now here we have some security, some port rules that are also a very important part of configuring SSH access. SSH uses port 22, and right now we don't have port 80 or port 443 open. That way, the only way to access our virtual machine is through SSH, as opposed to if we had, HTTP and HTTPS as ports that we have open as ways you can access a virtual machine. It just opens, it increases what's called the attack surface, just other ways to get in your virtual machine. I think of as ports as almost like doors to enter a house. Right now we have 3 doors that can enter a house, but if we untoggle these, we only have 1 door that can enter a house. So of course, when you think about security, funneling traffic through 1 door versus 3 is much more secure, and that's what we are going to be practicing in this case for our virtual machine. So now we're at the end of this page for creating a virtual machine. We've gone through the basics, gone over subscription, the resource group, created a virtual machine name, specified a region for this virtual machine and the availability zone for it to be in. We've selected a security type of the available options. We just picked the simplest one for the image, which is a pre-configured template with operating system software that we need to run our server. We picked Ubuntu Linux, an architecture that is a bit cheaper, because we don't need the performance of x64. So between the two of these, we've selected ARM64. We skipped the Azure spot discount. We selected a simple a configuration here in terms of size, a size configuration for our VMs here. No hibernation enabled. We use an SSH public key for secure access to our virtual machine. We have the username here and the key pair name with the same name as the username here. And so once we create this, it will download to my local machine here for me to be able to SSH into this virtual machine. And only through SSH can we access our virtual machine for additional configuration and monitoring. All right. So now we have a few more options here in terms of how we can configure this. We could just click review and create. And, that's at least how we'll create this virtual machine here for the sake of simplicity. In this case, we're all good. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to go ahead and click create, because that's really all we need to get our virtual machine going. And as you can see here, it's asking me to download the private key and create the resource. Azure doesn't store the private key. Only I know what this private key is, and so I got to make sure that I keep it very safe. So now that we have clicked create, showing that the deployment is in progress. So just watch it. It's going to take a few seconds here, but not too long. Very soon we will see that this is created. Now it says the deployment is complete, and we can click go to resource. And here we have a lot more settings on the left for how we can configure our virtual machine. Like I mentioned, this is much more complex than configuring a MacBook, right? If anyone has purchased a MacBook, take it out the box, you plug it in, a few pages saying welcome to Apple, MacBook Pro, Air, whatever you got. And just with a few clicks, you have a lot of different software already installed. You can just open up your computer and start going in terms of using it, and for different services like browsing the web, opening up a word processing file, a word processing software like Microsoft Word or Pages, which is Apple's version. And so there's a lot that you can do with a MacBook. However, as you can see, in creating this virtual machine, there's so many more configurations that are available to us. So for example, I am limited. If I wanted to run a specific service or an application or software on my MacBook, I am limited to the size in terms of CPU, memory, IOPS, in terms of read-write performance. I am limited to what my MacBook, what is offered by my MacBook Pro. But if I wanted more power and if I wanted more capability and if I had a specific project in mind that needs more performance than what my MacBook can offer, I can go on Azure.com and create a virtual machine using Azure.